In the modern high-compression engine, modern gasoline gives the greater performance required today. The car accelerates more rapidly, climbs hills faster, travels more miles per gallon. In addition to fashioning the molecules to prevent fuel knot, refineries usually add minute quantities of tetraethyl lead to help accomplish the same purpose. This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline.
There was a time when the air itself was toxic, not in a visible way. Not like smoke from a fire or fumes from a chemical spill. This was different. It was invisible, odourless, and for decades it surrounded entire cities, entered homes, settled into lungs, and slowly affected the brains of millions of people. People didn't panic. They didn't wear masks. They didn't avoid going outside because they didn't know. But some people did. In the early 20th century, the world was changing fast. Cars were becoming more common, engines more powerful, fuel demand increasing. But there was a problem. Early gasoline engines had a flaw. They knocked. A violent, inefficient combustion that damaged engines and reduced performance. Engineers were desperate for a solution. Something to stabilize fuel, something to make engines run smoother, and eventually they found it. In the 1920s, researchers working for companies like General Motors discovered that adding a compound called tetraethyl lead to gasoline eliminated engine knocking. It worked remarkably well. Engines ran smoother, more efficiently, more powerfully. There was just one issue. Lead is a neurotoxin. Even in small amounts, lead can damage the human brain, affect memory, behavior, cognitive development. This wasn't new information. Lead poisoning had been known for centuries. Ancient civilizations had documented its dangers. By the early 1900s, scientists already understood that exposure to lead could cause severe neurological damage. So when lead was introduced into gasoline, there were concerns, immediate concerns, but the potential profits were enormous. The automotive industry was expanding rapidly, fuel demand was exploding, and tetraethyl lead offered a simple, effective solution to a major engineering problem. So production began. Factories were built to manufacture the additive. Workers handled it directly, often with little protection, and almost immediately something went wrong. At one facility, workers began behaving strangely. They became disoriented, agitated, hallucinating. Some reported seeing things that weren't there. Insects crawling across surfaces, creatures moving in the air. The facility gained a nickname: the House of Butterflies. Workers weren't just getting sick, they were losing their minds. Several died, others were hospitalized. The cause was clear: lead exposure. This should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Production was temporarily halted. Investigations were conducted. Public concern grew. But the companies involved reassured everyone. They claimed the issue was limited to factory conditions, that proper handling would prevent harm, that the product itself was safe. And slowly, production resumed. Leaded gasoline entered the market. Cars began using it. Cities filled with vehicles. Exhaust fumes released into the air, and with every engine running, tiny particles of lead were emitted. They didn't disappear, they didn't break down, they accumulated in the air, in the soil, on surfaces, inside homes. People inhaled them, ingested them, carried them inside their bodies, day after day, year after year. Children were especially vulnerable, their developing brains more sensitive to toxins. Even low levels of lead exposure could affect intelligence, behavior, attention, but these effects weren't dramatic, not immediate. They were subtle, gradual, easy to overlook, and that made them easier to ignore. Some scientists raised concerns. They studied lead levels in the environment, in human blood. One of them was Clair Patterson. He wasn't originally studying gasoline. He was trying to determine the age of the Earth, but during his research, he noticed something strange. Lead contamination was everywhere, far beyond what should have been natural. He investigated further, measured lead levels in the atmosphere, in oceans, in ice cores, and what he found was alarming. Lead levels had increased dramatically, especially in areas with heavy automobile use. The source was clear. Leaded gasoline. Patterson tried to warn others, published his findings, spoke out about the dangers, but his work wasn't welcomed, because by that point, leaded gasoline wasn't just a product. It was an industry standard. Entire economies relied on it, companies depended on it, and acknowledging the danger would have consequences, so his research was challenged, dismissed, undermined, funding became difficult, opportunities limited. He faced resistance, not because his data was wrong, but because of what it implied, that millions of people were being exposed to a neurotoxin every single day, and that it had been happening for decades. Despite this resistance, the evidence continued to grow. Studies showed elevated lead levels in children, cognitive effects, behavioral changes, public awareness slowly increased, and eventually regulatory action began. In the 1970s, governments started phasing out leaded gasoline. Gradually, step by step, lead levels in the environment began to decline. Blood lead levels dropped. And something else happened. Average IQ scores increased. Rates of certain behavioral issues decreased. The impact became clear in hindsight. For decades, entire populations had been exposed. Not accidentally, but as a result of a known decision. The lead wasn't hidden, it wasn't unknown, it was used deliberately. Because it solved a problem, because it made engines better, because it made money, and for a long time, that was enough. The story of leaded gasoline isn't just about chemistry or engineering, it's about priorities, a choice between safety and progress, a decision to continue despite the risks, and a consequence that wasn't immediate, but widespread, because unlike sudden disasters, this one unfolded slowly, across cities, across countries, across generations. The air people breathed was quietly altered, and most never realized it. Even now, traces of that exposure remain, in soil, in infrastructure, in the environment, a lingering reminder of a time when the danger was known, but not stopped. Because the most unsettling part of this story isn't that lead was dangerous, it's that it always was, and yet it was still put into the air, every day, for decades.